All right, let's just get right into it. We've all seen those headlines, right? Another massive data breach. It feels like every other week some big company has a major security slip-up. But have you ever stopped to wonder why this keeps happening over and over again? Well, in this explainer, we're going to pull back the curtain on the surprisingly simple reason your data keeps ending up in the wrong hands.
So let's start with a number that just kind of jumps off the page, 681%. That is the insane increase in security incidents related to something called APIs. This isn't just some small trend, you guys. It's a full-blown explosion, and it is absolutely key to understanding the whole problem.
And look, this isn't some abstract threat we're talking about. These are household names. T-Mobile, Equifax, LinkedIn, Dell. The list just goes on and on. All of them have been hit, exposing the personal info of hundreds of millions of people. And let's be real, that probably includes some of us.
So, that leads us to the big question, the one we're here to answer. Is this the work of some shadowy super hackers using crazy advanced cyber weapons? Or is the truth something way simpler and, honestly, a lot more worrying? Let's dig in and find out.
To really solve this mystery, we've got to start with the key piece of evidence. The thing that's at the scene of the crime for almost every single one of these breaches. And that piece of evidence? It's the API.
So, what on earth is an API? Well, the simple definition is it's just a set of rules that lets different apps talk to each other. But, that's kind of dry. Here's a much better way to think about it. An API is like a waiter in a restaurant. You don't just walk into the kitchen yourself and start grabbing ingredients, right? No way. You give your order to the waiter. The waiter then goes to the kitchen, communicates your request, and brings back your food. That waiter? That's the API. It's the digital go-between, taking requests and delivering responses.
Now, this brings us to a really crucial distinction. If an API is the individual waiter, then the API gateway is like the restaurant's front door and manager, all rolled into one. It's the single entry point that manages all the different waiters, making sure every single request is handled the right way. It's the central command hub, and trust me, understanding that difference is going to be super important in a minute.
Okay, so we know what an API is now. Let's look at how the heck they're being exploited. We are literally opening up the hacker's playbook to see the exact moves they're making to steal our data.
And this quote, this gets right to the heart of the matter. The biggest data leaks, the ones you read about in the news, they're not happening because of some crazy, complex exploit that no one's ever seen. They're happening because of simple, fundamental mistakes. It's not about a hacker needing to be brilliant enough to break a super strong lock. It's about them just finding a door that was left wide open.
Now, this right here is the official most wanted list for security flaws. We're going to focus on a few of these. Number 1, BOLA, is basically the system not checking if you're allowed to see the data you're asking for. Number 2, broken authentication, is pretty much what it sounds like. Weak logins, stuff that's easy to guess or bypass. And then get this, number 9, improper inventory management. This is where companies literally forget about APIs they've built. They have these shadow waiters just wandering around totally unsecured. Let's really zero in on that number 1 threat, Broken Object Level Authorization, or just BOLA for short. Now, I know the name sounds super technical and complicated, but the way hackers use it is shockingly simple. Here's the entire attack step by step. First, you log into a website to see your orders, and the URL has your user ID in it. Let's say it's 123. Step 2, a hacker just changes that number in the address bar to 124. That's it. And in step 3, if the system is vulnerable, that digital waiter, the API, doesn't even bother to check if the person asking is actually user 124. It just shrugs, goes to the kitchen, and brings back someone else's private data. That's the whole trick. And that's the flaw behind some of the biggest data breaches in history.
All right, enough with the theory. Let's look at the real-world damage. These are the case files, the actual stories of what happens when these simple, tiny flaws get exploited on a massive scale. Just in the few cases we're about to look at, over 850 million records were exposed. Let that sink in. That's the staggering scale of the damage we're talking about, and it all comes back to these basic, foundational security mistakes.
Okay, first up, Optus in Australia. This was a classic case of what we just talked about, a shadow API. It was an old, forgotten endpoint that was just left online. And the critical failure? It required no login, no password, no authentication whatsoever. It was a completely unlocked door just sitting there on the internet.
Then there's Twitter, a perfect real-world example of that BOLA attack we just walked through.
A flaw in their API let attackers do exactly what we just described. Just change some numbers around, and suddenly they could link 5.4 million accounts to their supposedly private emails and phone numbers.
And who could forget Equifax? This one was just a story of pure negligence. Hackers got in through a vulnerability that was already publicly known. A fix was available. The company was even told about it. But they just didn't apply the patch for over 2 months, leaving this massive, gaping hole in their defenses that attackers were more than happy to walk right through. Which brings us to cases like T-Mobile. And this is so important because it shows how one single point of failure can lead to absolute catastrophe. This wasn't some complex network-wide attack. It was one single flawed API. One digital waiter not doing its job, and that's all it took for an attacker to grab the data of 37 million customers.
Okay, so that's the problem. And yeah, it's a big one, but it's not hopeless. Far from it. So let's shift gears now and talk about the solution. There's a clear, actionable framework for how to defend against these exact kinds of attacks.
Remember our restaurant manager, the API gateway? Well, this is where it gets to be the hero of the story. By making sure all traffic goes through that one single centralized gateway, you basically create a security checkpoint. No request gets to the kitchen without first going through the manager, who can check IDs, verify permissions, and enforce all the rules. And this all boils down to a few core principles for a solid defense. First, security by design. You can't just bolt security on at the end. You have to build it in from day one. Second, you have to leverage that API gateway as your central enforcer. Third, proactive management. You can't protect what you don't know exists, so you've got to be constantly hunting for those shadow APIs. And finally, and this one is so important, you need a deny by default mindset. Assume everything is locked down unless you have a very, very good reason to open it up.
So let's end on this thought. After seeing how all these massive breaches actually happen, it really makes you wonder, doesn't it? Is the biggest threat to our digital lives really some advanced, state-sponsored cyber weapon? Or is it something much smaller and much more human? A single, forgotten line of code, a simple check that was missed, a digital door left unlocked? The evidence, well, it really seems to suggest it's the latter. And that's something we should all be thinking about.